Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 213 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In the last episode, we talked about making puffers. We've got lots of new recipes. So now we need to kind of plan this. It's probably going to be too complicated to plan precisely. But we do want to get a general idea of scale so we can build around that. Out of all of the things that puffers do, really the only thing we actually need them to do is to hatch eggs. And we have some eggs, but of course they'll run out. And so we need to keep growing puffers to get more eggs. But what that means is the egg hatching process is the limiting factor, and all of the other puffer processes are dependent on the hatching. And then that hatching is what makes these crystals. Because we need the eggshell seeds to add to the polluted fish water, which gives us the shards. So what kind of scale do we want? Well, the original setup has a lot of contributing components that we can borrow from, and both setups wouldn't be able to run at the same time at full power, and that's okay because this is mostly dormant anyway, so I think it can stand to be doubled up on. But I believe we built this up around 15 crystals a second. And we did. And we should be mostly consuming them. And we are. We're not using all of them because of productivity modules, so there's that. But that also allows the system to be able to do more. So I'm actually kind of fine with it based on 15 and then having some crystals left over, because then that'll be resources to share. But the reason why we wanted 15 a second here is not necessarily for making the modules. Because if you look at the modules here, to make one module a second, which looks like our goal, and that kind of sounds familiar, we only needed 3.15 of the logic boards, even though we're making 15. So the reason why we made all those extra ones is for the purposes of research, that the first tier of these boards goes into researching the higher tier of modules. This is not the case for the higher tier of boards. They only go into extra modules. So we can kind of plan this here and see what we're working with. Let's make a new line. Let's see what we would need for speed module 5s. We haven't researched them yet because they need those gemstones, but we would be able to make them. So let's say we wanted to do 1 per second. And we can't use productivities in that. So we need number 4 and number 3. Because we want to see what kind of numbers we would be dealing with. 10 integrated electronics, 10 module contacts, 5 transistors. These are all pretty decent numbers. But the big one here is the speed logic board. And we do know that we'll already be able to produce these speed module 2s, which need to go into it, so we don't have to worry about that. The big thing here is these logic boards, because in these goes the crystals. And we can use productivities here to make an enormous setup, but it's probably worth it just to use less crystals, because these are a very valuable resource. It takes a lot of work to make these crystals, so this is one thing you really don't want to use anything but productivity modules on, no matter how big it gets. But you see that we're getting a number here of about 8.5. So we can take that a step further. What would we need to do to make 8.5 of these crystals? Well, we need to polish them. And we need to make the raw crystals, which are made from the fish water and our eggshell seeds. And we'll use the better version. And then we need the eggshell seed, which comes from the puffer powder. And you take that all the way down. I don't think any of these can use productivities. To our source, which is 8.5. So it's a 1-to-1 ratio of shells to crystals. And you have to remember that when we make one type of crystal, we make all types of crystals. So this isn't 8.5 eggshells per module, but it's 8.5 eggshells for 1 module a second of speed, productivity, and efficiency. So it's not quite as bad as it seems. But let's keep taking it. All of this is not a plan. we're just trying to figure out the rough numbers to see how big all this stuff is. And we're looking at the inputs to make sure they're realistic. We're looking at the number of machines to make sure they're realistic. And, you know, these don't even have any speed modules in them yet. So certainly if they did, the numbers would be a lot smaller. But we definitely want to check anything that takes productivities, because that would make the setup huge. But, you know, these are all reasonable numbers. There's nothing too crazy here. So we can keep going. And now we need to get these eggshells, which come from the different types of puffing. So we have two choices here. We can do one type of puffer egg can supply the entire factory. So in other words, this one would make 8.5, this one would make 8.5, and so on. That way, no matter what puffer we needed to make or we could make at the time, we would get our required amount. That's ideal, even though most of the time all the setups are going to be stationary. What I normally do when I build setups, at least in this factory, is that you never know what's going to happen, so prepare for all circumstances. So let's try that, where we would need these 42 hatcheries. You know, speed modules can go in there to make them less. But the real question here is, how fast could we make these eggs? Hatching them is easy. Actually, breeding them is not. And this is fairly complicated, where we get random amounts of eggs from each type of breeding. But that kind of doesn't matter, because in the end, we're still going to get the same amount of egg shells, regardless of which puffer started the process. So it's kind of a little weird here. This really isn't something you could precisely calculate with Hellmod, so I basically don't even want to try. Well, one thing we can look at is that when we're breeding, we get about 75% of the intended egg, and then about 25% for the other types. Doesn't always ring true, but it's fairly close amongst all those types. So we could just calculate that. So basically we would add an extra third of output to try to guess. So we can probably drop this number a little bit here. So from 8.58, let's multiply times 0.75. So let's do like 6.44. Make sure these numbers look right. See, puffers go out, but puffers go in as well. We're basically growing puffers here, so that's why we start with a smaller amount of puffers and we get a greater amount because we're hatching them. We're just trying to get a general idea. We would need 687 puffer refugiums. So the hatcheries, we can put a few modules in, but with this, I mean, we certainly can put some modules in. I mean, it helps, but it's still 380 machines. And we can kind of figure out how big they are by building a few. Looks like they're fairly complicated to build. Uses lots of pipes, so that's always something good to use for our new setup. Really, all of these should be in the new setup, but the hatcheries aren't that hard to make, but certainly refugiums are pretty hard. But, you know, there's a hatchery, reasonably small, but these refugiums are huge. And of course, they're going to have lots of pipes going in there too, so that is not going to be dense at all. So knowing that, we probably don't want to build a setup where we can support each type of puffer type individually, because that means we would need this times 5 because we would have to cover essentially all 5 puffer types, and that would be insane and not necessary. Plus, on the previous episode, we were reviewing all of the potential outputs of the different type of puffers, and it's all basically useful stuff, especially the acid components. Because right now, you know, we're doing okay on acid. You know, we're maxed out basically on those two, and sodium nitrate less so. But when we go to tier 3 ore sorting, we're going to need a ton of acid to process the ores. So we're going to find ourselves needing this stuff. So I really would rather all these operate, and there's really no reason why they can't, because we basically can use all of these resources. So It's going to be a little more difficult to build, but I think it would be better off if we kind of planned for it as a whole, as opposed to individual parts like that, if that makes sense. Okay, well now that we have scale, let's try to actually design something. The first step of the process is hatching the eggs. So you essentially want one of each type. And we need to decide how much to get. And let's see, is this going to mix them all together? Let's just do 10. No, but what if we did the matrix solver? Doesn't seem like it. Let's do by factory here. So we can do 10, but that's probably going to be way too many. 5 is probably to be too many as well, but we can start with that. So each one of these, we can do 5 machines. And this is kind of more of what I was expecting the setup to be, where it was a relatively small amount of individual machines here. I noticed that the amount of eggshells we're getting is different with all these. Is that because the hatching speed is different? Yes. So they get longer with the bigger ones here. Well, that makes things a little more complicated to figure out here. So we calculated that we needed 8.58. 8.58 divided by 5. So we're looking for 1.72 on each line here. So I think we're going to have to do them separately out here. Yeah. Gotta click out here, click add, click that. Click out here, click add. Yeah. That's kind of what I was worried about here. So we don't want to try too hard to make this perfect, because it's not really possible. But we want to see what we can do. So we needed 1.72, I believe. Yeah. So do 1.72. So we hit that. Throw the speed modules in there. We get a number. Then we come in here. Do the same thing. Put the speed modules in, but it's going to require more hatcheries because they hatch slower. This would be so much faster with speed module 5s, which is part of the reason why we're doing this, is because it will help. So we're at 8.6. And we want to check our numbers to make sure everything looks good, where we have an input of eggs and an output of puffers. Alright, well this much is working. We could plan the entire setup, but I think it might be better to plan each individual component and build it somewhere so we can just make sure it all works before we just go nuts and then find out it doesn't. Okay, well, we know we're going to need these two things. Anything else we would need to build? Crystallizers if we're not. Very few ore powderizers. But yeah, let's do... Well, we might as well do the ore powderizers anyway, just to get everything on the bus here. So ore powderizer, crystallizer, and the puffer stuff. Let's see what we've got. I'm sure we've already got some of those on there. We do have the crystallizers right here. The powderizers look like a no. And those other puffer components look like a no. Well, each one of these is pretty simple. It just goes into one tier. Ooh, that's so nice. So fast. So let's build 3 of them here. We want to do the powderizers. I see that tier 1, but do we have tier 2s? We don't. It's kind of weird that we don't. But I guess it makes sense because we would get the next powderizer with the next level of dust. There's actually no reason why we can't make it, though. We haven't gone through this process yet with the powders, but we certainly could in a bit. So we might as well go through the process of researching these things here? Well, we need thermal water extraction 2, which we cannot make because we don't have titanium. That's fine. We'll just hit it so we can get the ore powderizer 2, which we can make, and then it unlocks all these mad clown ways of sorting through powders. But the way it works is you take the powder from the previous step and then add chunks to it, thermal water and sulfuric acid, and then you get a sludge. And that sludge you can add sodium hydroxide to get dust and some wastewater. And you can do the same thing with cupric as well, and then all of the mad clown way of doing things. But then you take that dust and you can sort it into more resources. And the advantage to the dust methods is that it is 100% efficient with no slag, but it also doesn't require the use of any catalyst. So we would get a nickel and a cobalt from there, and on this one we get a silver and a gold. So both of those seem pretty good. I mean, they really are one of the best ways of sorting resources if you can go through the effort of getting it to that stage. It's probably not worth upgrading our setup to do this now. Or is it? Because we would get a tiny amount of cobalt. And specifically, we don't need any advanced ore sorting. We could just use the tier that we have now to send this through. And we already have chunks available, and we're not doing anything besides sorting the chunks. And we have the acids as well. And we can get thermal water there if we need to. So we have all those things, so it wouldn't be that big of a deal. So we would produce a ton of ore for a tiny bit of cobalt. And also a tiny bit of gold. So I think the question is are those things locking other things? Well, cobalt, I think we have been waiting on that. Let's see, we need cobalt ore and carbon to make the ingot. And then limestone to make cobalt oxide. And then we can powderize the ingot if we needed to. And that would unlock battery 2. And I believe we could go down that path to complete lithium batteries if we wanted. And then we get all this other stuff. Like better accumulators. I wasn't thinking we would do cobalt yet, because it's tier 3 ore sorting, but we can get a tiny amount of it, processing it normally. The question is, would it be enough to matter? It's hard to say, but we certainly could do it. And then that would allow us to make cobalt steel, which then would go into the cobalt parts. And then that would start accessing some of these more valuable things that really only need the cobalt in addition to stuff we already have. Probably a real big one that would be nice are blue belts, which we absolutely could make if we had the cobalt. That would get us express inserters and express stack inserters. And that does open the door for the pink research, which we would eventually need to do. But I know it's a bit of a tangent, but this is actually quite interesting. It probably wouldn't affect, oh, that's a fast research, what we're doing now with this setup, because all these numbers are fairly small, and the main thing that the cobalt would give us is better logistics. And we wouldn't need fast belts or fast inserters for much of any of this, really, because the rate is all slow. But where it would matter is here. So if we were rebuilding this setup to make it denser, having faster belts and faster inserters would absolutely help us. So I kind of want to do that. The real big thing I'm worried about is the stone. So right now we're making 2 belts of crushed ore, and then 1 belt is getting siphoned off to make the chunks. So then we have 1 belt of crushed and 1 belt of chunks. Well, what happens when we do the tier after that, and we need crystals. Well, since they are derived from the previous tier, it means we will need to make 3 belts of crushed, 2 belts of washed, and then 1 belt of leached, which would be here, and then that would give us our 1 belt of each. Which means that instead of each one of these setups creating 1 red belt of stone, it would be 1.5 belts of stone. So in other words, we would need 9 belts here instead of just the 6. And we already have so much stone going in here where we really don't have any space anymore. So that would actually cause a lot of problems. But if we could upgrade these to blue, then since the blues are 15 faster, at least with the way I have it set up. Let's double check that. Yeah, they go at 45 a second compared to 30. That means all we would have to do is upgrade these to blue, and then the setup could remain more or less the same as far as these belts are concerned. And all of these could potentially be upgraded as well to be denser. So that is interesting. Wasn't really planning on upgrading this, especially because of kind of how dense all this stuff ended up being. But I kind of want to now. So, what about gold? Well, it goes into some stuff. I think like vehicle solar panel 3s we could do. We'd probably have limited applications. But the cobalt would be very nice. The cobalt steel gear wheels go into all of the blue transport stuff. And like lithium cobalt oxide would go into batteries. And you'd make that from cobalt and lithium. And then the lithium would come from lithium salt, which we can make from thermal water or brown algae. So that's some nice uses here. So I'm actually pleasantly surprised. We've got some options. Okay, well that's a bit of a detour. I know we were talking about puffers and whatnot, but in fact we probably can continue to work on the puffers for now, because I don't think we would need, strictly speaking, any of that cobalt stuff just for this setup. We'll have to keep an eye on it if we're ever in a situation where we're like, oh man, I wish we had blue belts. Then maybe we should. But I'm kind of worried that this would end up being, a couple of episodes to potentially upgrade this and maybe move some stuff around. So let's put that on the back burner and potentially do that maybe after modules if we can wait that long. It'd be nice to have better batteries for our character or better accumulators for the base, but it's not critical because we're surviving. But for now, we will research this because we can make use of these ore powderizer 2s, which was the point of coming through here. And we'll worry about researching any of the other cobalt stuff for later. Well, that's going fast. That won't take more than a second. Okay, well, let's do this one then, because it's in line. We want number 1, and hurry up with number 2. There we go. We probably also want to make those grinding wheels and whatnot, because those are kind of annoying to handcraft, but I'll worry about that later. And since, I don't think we need too many of these, 50 is probably fine, since we seem to have survived okay up until now at least. And then hopefully we have all that stuff nearby. We can cut that one out. Get those good. Oh, I see green. Let's check to see if we have any extra ones stored up here, because we very well might. Oh, we definitely do. So the ore powderizers, throw them in our inventory. So we'll take them down there. And there's the powder mixers, which are different. There's a lot of lights just kind of randomly scattered around in here. Alright, let's change this one over to make the hatcheries, and they include lamps, which is interesting. But since we have those on the network, robots should be able to grab them from wherever they are and just bring them. It won't be particularly efficient, but It's like one thing, so who cares? And then there they go. Then there's some robots from here, which were nearby where these lamps are being stored. And they're taking them down. Let's see, it's not running yet because no stone bricks. Is that because... oh, yes. We were putting them here as somewhere to get rid of them. But I believe we switched that to actually dropping the bricks off at where they're being made. Which would make this run a little smoother. Because anytime there's any bricks in there, they're going to go the whole way down. And it's not really necessary, considering if they pulled it from the belt, they wouldn't even need to do that at all. So I'm just going to get rid of these. And we'll leave the rest of that in place in case we change our mind about it. But there it goes. Alright, well, we need one more then. Put it right there. Switch it over. And the numbers are a lot higher, so let's set this to 200. And looks like we already have glass up here, so that's great. We did kind of put it in the far corner, but not that it really matters that much. And there we go. Okay then. So first the thing we wanted to build was the hatchery. And we got differing amounts, depending on how big it is. Let's just start with this. And as far as the orientation, I don't know if these can be rotated, but we talked before about trying to take up this space right here for the purposes of the next tier of crystals. It won't necessarily be perfectly in line here, but if we have stuff here and it's going down, then we probably want to start with the eggshells being at the very top, because that's the logical beginning of the process. I guess it doesn't really matter exactly how it's oriented, but let's go top down. It's nice that I can kind of clear some of this stuff out now. And I got my own robots for that. Okay, so how would this work? Well, let's grab a few hatcheries here. And if we're going down, I guess we'd have 5 of them. And they don't really care about what you give them. They'll work on anything. But we still probably want to have this sorted out. So the eggs would go in and get taken care of. And then we would have an output of random things. Based on these really low numbers, it probably doesn't matter for using near and fars. It does look better though, to have them properly set up. Let's see, something like that. Let's just grab some power. And then they go in. We'd want all those outputs to merge somewhere, and also all of the inputs as well. But now that we have these numbers, we can kind of go down here where we need 8 and 10. So if we did this, they don't have to be super close. I'll leave a gap. So that would be 8. And the 10, is this within range of robots? Kinda, but let's help them out. And then 2 more, which would need 12 and 15. So that's 16. Seems like some of these power poles got a little messed up. Looks like we put too many here. This one needed to be 12. And the last one, 15. So if we're good, we need a total of 50 machines. And we got them. The output of all of these would go into a sorting / storage warehouse. The eggshells will need to get processed, turned into eggshell seeds, and so on. Don't know exactly how that process will work, because we want to grow these things first. But we can kind of place the warehouse here, have all of the inputs go in, because we essentially want to process every single egg that we have access to. So they all want to go in there. And then the eggshell remains will have to be extracted from this. Since this process is not limited, we want to process every available egg and store every available puffer type. And they will all be in here, and this will be the logic warehouse for that. And also, at the top, we need another sorting warehouse. Not sure how many spaces we should have. It'd probably be nice to make it similar to this one. So we need to have our input, but it happens over here, so we probably want to move this a bit so it's centered with the belt. So 1, 2, 1, 2. Although, it'd be better if this was like that. It's definitely off center, but as far as belt positions, it makes the most sense. Okay, so any available puffer eggs we have would be put into this warehouse, and then they would be sorted along each direction. And we'd sort it like this. So gaseous right here, and I guess they're probably in the order right there, but gaseous, rancid, blazing, acidic. It's kind of hard to tell the difference between the eggs and the puffers, but make sure you have the eggs on here. And then they would just get ejected to where they need to go. And this is enough of the process to actually test it. Because there's no logic attached to it, it can just run as it does. So there's not much to that. Our robots help a little bit. So let's go flying up here and find a spot to get started. Well, in the corner here we have a giant stereotype patch, but it's actually not as big as this one. And there's actually quite a few of them scattered around, but it looks like I've made a fairly concerted effort to not just cover up patches of ore. So we should probably continue that trend. So maybe we want to use this section on the side here. Looks like our character's getting a little low on power, so we'll want to take care of that. But we also want to give the robots access to what we want to build. So let's put that there, and probably want a ton of places for them to park. And I guess since we need it, we'll plop a charge pad in there. So we can charge up our character real quick. But before we stand there, we probably want to actually get this blueprint placed. I'll cover up that gap later. So we've got this, and we don't want to smash it in too much. But I don't think anything up there is going to really be expanding anymore. So how about we kind of place this like right here, so it's just barely within the logistics zone. And our robots are helping a little bit, but gotta get the batteries charged. And if you zoom in on here, the robots weren't covering it. You can kind of see what our charge status is if you don't want to kind of check down here. So that wasn't too annoying. And while that's building, we can go grab our puffer eggs. Kind of want to grab some concrete too, so I can cover up that little grassy section. How is this rubite mine doing? Pretty good. It's almost cleared out. Actually, it won't be too long before it is. But let's grab all of this stuff for now. Well, I kind of want to use Prospector and kind of scan all these different veins just so we can clear them out and then later on be able to build stuff there and not worry about potentially covering something up. Notice that we don't really have any brass chests, so we probably want to build some of those because they are our biggest chest we have right now. That's of the 1x1 size. But I was thinking, as far as these extra resources, we can kind of just put them next to here. We put our swamp trees and temperate trees in there. And we keep the eggs. So let's grab a bunch of concrete there. Let's see if we can find an easy spot to build these brass chests. Somewhere where brass is already being used. Well, brass is coming in here. It would be pretty easy to just put an assembler right there with a storage chest for brass. Not sure how fast this needs to be. Seems like it's basically using all of it. Let's get this looking nice real quick. It's nice the robots are helping picking up little biter orbs that are kind of hard to see. Wow, the base is almost completely covered in concrete. Does that mean we finally can start working on the refined concrete since it's half as efficient as far as stone is concerned? Oh yeah, it's kind of interesting how that works. I don't know why, but when you run over it with concrete, it like destroys. It says unknown key. That might have something to do with it. But that's kind of why they saved this spot for last. Because you just destroy it. Make sure we get this right. I think it's that one is the water. This one is the mud water. Let's get this network extended as far as it'll go. Trying to make a conscious effort every time something gets built or anytime I go by a section of the factory to just make sure that it's properly covered. Because it kind of isn't up there, and certainly none of that is, but if we take care of the factory little bits at a time, eventually we will have the entire thing covered. Which means no more unhappy bots, where they have to turn around just because we took one step too far. But that's looking good. So, we should be able to test this process now, where we are going to put in our eggs, and we only have the regular kind, so they're just going to come out here, and then they're going to get hatched. We do need to put modules in there, because I believe our plan was assuming speed modules all around. Oh yeah. And then potentially the 2 different puffer eggs will come down here as well as the shells, and they'll all build in there, and that's all we're going to see in the beginning. Wow. Had exactly the number of modules we needed. Okay. It's a pretty simple beginning of this process here, but let's see how it works. Just lots of eggs. And they're just dancing, I guess. Spinning around. And they're hatching them, and they look very similar. Oop. I see one of the rancid ones in there. And they're going to go down into that warehouse. And this end part will be a little slower. And there it goes. So as far as what we got out of it, well, just about the same amount of puffer eggshells that went in. And then we have 3 rancid puffers, and the rest of them will be the gaseous ones. Now it's time for the next step of the process, which is figuring out the breeding setup, but that's going to have to wait until the next episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.